questions about cannabis edibles product design. Partly because I'm a product designer and I've developed a lot of food products. A lot of students who join the programs at Niagara College have a wide variety of interests, and I love the intellectual curiosity and the creativity that they bring. Niagara College just happens to have a professional cannabis production program and the Culinary Innovation and Food Technology program, which both have interesting interfaces with cannabis edibles product design. Obviously, this is taken from a Canadian context. This lecture is done as part of our Hot Topics series within some of our culinary innovation courses at Niagara College. And given the current status of us teaching online, I'm going to put this up in my database of different lecture content and offer it out to both our nutrition course but also our product development course. So, at the end of this lecture, you'll be able to discern the different types of cannabis edible products that are legal within the Canadian regulations of 2019. So again, there may be changes and shifts. This is all within the Canadian context, and different jurisdictions around the world have different regulations. But cannabis products are legal for sale within licensed retailers, and they're legal for production with licensed producers. So there are some key regulatory limits within the product design, and we'll go through those summarized tables from Health Canada. We'll discuss some key features about cannabis product formulation that are of major concern for successful product design. Again, I can't rehash all of the chemical concepts, but this is a really high-level conversation, and I'm hoping that people follow up with additional questions about specific formulation issues. Then we'll briefly discuss the importance of preventive control and HACCP principles in the product design. And last but not least, go through some of the processes of how to list a product with a provincial retailer, such as Ontario Cannabis Store. So in Canada, this is taken from Health Canada, there are a variety of different licenses. You have to be a licensed producer, licensed processor actually, to be able to legitimately make cannabis food products, or cannabis edibles as they're known, in Canada. And so you have to be licensed either as a standard processor or a microprocessor, depending on the volume of cannabis or the cannabis equivalent that you're going to be manufacturing. And so the equivalent of 60 kilos or 600 kilos of dried cannabis per year can be substituted down to the equivalent in extracts or rosins or oils derived from the product. So there are different types of licenses, and you do need to be aware that cannabis food products are going to be classified within these cannabis products standard processing or microprocessing licenses. Now that said, sometimes these organizations will want to also have analytical testing or research licenses within their organization. And there are, within the tables that I'm sharing with the course on Blackboard, there are additional tables of mutually allowable compliances. So you can have multiple licenses, but not all combinations are permitted under Health Canada's licensing. So you do need to be very aware of what you can and can't do. Is, let's say, for example, you want to be a processor. Well, you likely want to be doing some analytical testing and being capable of doing that hold and test validation on the dosing of the product. And so you may need to have certified results and valid results for the purposes of passing on to your retailer. You may need to have analytical testing at a certain accreditation level. And as such, this may be one of those dual licenses that you may be needing to approach. Or perhaps you're doing research and wanting to then also be able to commercialize those products. You may need to be looking at dual licensing within your product concept. So again, this is a really high-level conversation, and I'm going to keep referring you back to Health Canada and a number of different websites that are going to help with elucidation of all of the details that are necessary for that licensing. So back in October of 2019, the regulations were defined and cannabis edibles were permitted. Now, cannabis edibles can be a variety of different products. They can be food type products, eating or drinking products. They can be extracts, which would be used to dose foods. So you could put a few drops of a tincture or an oil into a food like a smoothie or a baked good that you prepare at your own home, or a commercial product that you are just dosing. It can be an extract for inhaling, and so these would be things like vape cartridges or dabs for cartridges, and they can be topicals. So these would be creams, things that you would be putting on your skin, hair, or nails. So each of these has different allowable THC limits. Now, you're likely saying, wait a second, we hear all about CBD. Why are there no CBD limits? Well, we're focused very much on THC as the primary psychoactive component in cannabis. CBD does not have the same psychoactive properties. It has other therapeutic properties that people are, that's the reason that it's such a popular component. But here in Canada, the emphasis is on the THC limit. And so what's interesting is in edible cannabis products, you have a maximum 10 milligrams of THC per package. And you may be saying, well, wait a second, that's a pretty low quantity. Well, you have to consider that a package is intended to be the sort of thing that you would be consuming in a maximal in one sitting. Of course, a consumer can break that package into smaller components, but it's intended to be a single serving component within that package. And that's why the dosing is on the low side, such that the consumer and marketing and education component behind cannabis edibles says, this is one serving of this product. Do be very wary about the dosing and do not go over that. Now, that said, within extracts, it can be it can be different. So you can have a maximum of 1,000 milligrams of THC per package, and vice versa with extracts for inhalation and or topicals, it can go upwards of 1,000 milligrams per package. The idea being that these are self-limiting. You're not likely going to be consuming that much within a single serving, if I can use that terminology, whereas in this case, it's very easy to overconsume. Now, what else do we see here? There are some specific rules about what can and can't be in cannabis edibles. So in the food type products, you can't add additional vitamins and minerals. You can't add nicotine or alcohol. Now, those of you who are more experienced product developers may be saying, well, what if I want to have a natural flavoring in an ethanol base? So many of the flavoring agents that are available from different flavoring houses are in alcohol bases for the solvent. And it is one where they want it to be under that 0.5% ABV threshold so that it is not going to be a confounding toxicant when consuming the edible cannabis. And along with this, you cannot put caffeine into the product within a certain limit. So you can't be going and adding caffeine intentionally. But if you were having a coffee or tea type product, that naturally occurring caffeine is generally considered acceptable. Within extracts, you can't have vitamins and minerals, no nicotine, no caffeine, and no added sugars, sweeteners, or colors. So this is a little bit more strict so that, again, you're not setting people up such that they'd want to be over-consuming it. Very similar for an inhalation and cannabis topicals. You cannot use it on, can't be intended for eyes or for damaged skin. And I know that some of the gray market cannabis topicals have been purported for healing of different scars or different cuts and abrasions, but those of you who have been taking my CULN 1115 class know that Health Canada sets a very, very stringent guidelines on what can have a health claim, and in general, Health Canada's approach here has been such that they do not want to be out saying cannabis products are going to have a net health benefit. There is a cannabis medical stream, and I'm not going to speak to that because that is a separate domain, and my expertise is specifically around food product development. But there is a cannabis for medical purposes application, and there are many different products that are allowed to have health claims within that stream. Within the food and recreational type products, you cannot make those health claims. So do be aware of that. Here in Canada, our rules are quite strict. From a packaging perspective, in edible cannabis, there has to be a child-resistant and plain packaging format. So the packaging can't have bright colors, it can't have graphics, it can't have all sorts of enticing elements on it that are going to make it stand out. And again, the general consensus is that Health Canada doesn't want to be out there saying, let's promote cannabis consumption. They accept that it's legal and they accept that people are going to partake, but they don't want to be allowing for excessive marketing and branding of this product. So the packaging is rather dull. That said, there's more to the packaging, and we'll talk about that in a later slide. Packaging also has to have a variety of different child-resistant features, and that is part of the evidence package when submitting it to retail, that you have to make sure that the child resistance elements are sufficiently complex depending on the format that you are working with. Very similar child resistant and plain packaging across all the other different concepts. With the case of cannabis extracts, you can have a maximum size of 90 mils as long as the THC is under 3%. You have to have some sort of dispensing device. And so in terms of ingesting cannabis extracts, in general, these are either mouth-based sprays or they're with a dropper type format. You can also have them in gel caps or capsule type formats. And that's what it's meant by a unit form if it's in a capsule. The maximum package size is going to be 7.5 grams for extracts if they're over 3% THC. And again, we've got very similar maximum sizes for inhalation, and again, child-resistant plain for topicals. For the labeling of cannabis edibles, there are a wide variety of different constraints, and I'll be providing the link to Health Canada's labeling guidance within the Blackboard for you. But in general, the labels for cannabis products have to be pretty darn plain. No fluorescent colors, no raised or embossed labels, no die cuts. Pretty much black and white, very vague with the coloration, because again, Health Canada doesn't want to be out promoting the consumption of cannabis. They want to allow for its legal sale, but they don't want to be seen as in any way allowing for any competitive advantage for one organization or another. So all labels must have a standardized cannabis symbol for products containing THC. They do have to have the standardized health warning messages, and they have to declare the THC and or CBD content. They have to show equivalency to dried cannabis because there are public possession limits. You can only possess a certain quantity on your person or within your domicile. There needs to be ingredient lists, allergen lists, and nutrition facts tables, just like standard food products as well. These are similar to other products across the class. Now, there are no nutrition facts table requirement for extracts, but there need to be these general health warnings, the equivalency, the potency, and so on listed on the different packages. Let's just take a quick look at what this looks like. This is the standard graphic that's required on the labels, and here are just a couple examples of some of the health preventative statements that are required on packaging. You don't have to have every single one on the physical package, but you have to show an intent that you are showing that there is adverse effect that's going to occur from this consumption. Some other key regulations: all products can't be designed in a way that's going to be appealing to children or youth. There cannot be health claims on recreational cannabis products. That's just a plain no-go, and part of it's predicated because the cannabis approvals in Canada came in a two-phase approach. First, there was cannabis for medical purposes approved, and there are extensive health claims and extensive diagnostic criterion for the allowing of cannabis consumption. Recreational, conversely, made sense to not have those health claims and leave that into the medical cannabis realm. There can't be any sort of association with alcoholic beverages, tobacco products, and or vaping products. There can't be dietary claims as well, like good source of vitamin C or nutrient content claims. And they can't make cosmetic type claims like will make you beautiful or will make you have less gray hair or things like that. Now, here's the key, jumping into some of the key questions about product development. There are a wide variety of delivery matrices that are used for the purposes of cannabis product development. And so many people who got into cannabis product development likely got into it through what we jokingly call the garagista movement. These are black market people who are experimenting with cannabis products in their homes. There is a global historical precedence for cannabis products, and in a wide variety of global contexts, cannabis has been used for food products historically. But what we often see is the flower or shake being used for food products. That's the small fines from production. There are ways of isolating the very oil-rich trichomes, or as it's also known as keef, where you're isolating by fractionation. Oftentimes you'll freeze the product and sift the product, and the trichomes tend to sift out in a much smaller particle fraction than the rest of the leaf and or woody cellulosic material. You can be fabricating products with rosin. Rosin is produced by high pressure, high temperature extrusion. So you're pressing that product in between hydraulic press of sorts, and that will allow for this squeeze out of the oily components of the cannabis product. Now you can start to go into extraction methodology where you're using butane or liquefied propane to extract out the hydrophobic components from the product. It's a much more complex topic. This part of the lecture could be its own lecture, but I'll save that for another time. You can take the cannabis and do a straight up ethanol tincture with a high concentration ethanol base. And you can do supercritical fluid carbon dioxide extraction, where you're using, again, high pressure liquefied carbon dioxide to extract out the oily components of the cannabis for the purposes of product development. Now, one of the key challenges here is that each of these has slightly different attributes and different cost points. Different BHO or PHO are reasonably accessible. Rosin, also reasonably accessible. Supercritical fluid CO2 extracts are reasonably accessible, but these are rather crude extracts, and they've got a lot of different subcomponents within them that are going to influence the sensory analysis attributes of the product. We're not just pulling out THC or CBD when we're doing these different extraction methodologies. We're pulling out a wide variety of other hydrophobic components, including terpenes, waxes, other cellular components, and those are going to both add to the sensory properties, but also modify the sensory properties potentially in a negative way. It could add to also the instability of the product. THC in particular is very, very prone to oxidation, and so you think of all of these different processes, you are exposing the product to a wide variety of oxidative and or mechanical and or temperature-based stresses that can accelerate oxidation. So the delivery matrix is going to influence your product development because you have to get that entire matrix into and dispersed within your product. There are extremely purified isolates of THC and CBD. The benefit of those is that you're adding an extreme amount of matrix to the product, but their cost is extremely prohibitive, and most edibles products are not going that route because the cost is difficult to justify for the food products, and it's been difficult for formulators to get the price point down. You have a different story? Tell me otherwise. Leave me some comments. Talk to me about your findings, but in general, we're going with a mid-tier extraction rate. But there are other oils, there are other elements to that matrix that need to be somehow mixed into the product in an effective way so that you get proper product quality in the end. Now, we also talk about products, and we just went through that summary of the different health regulations put out by Health Canada. We noticed that the verbiage was very specific about THC. However, there are a wide variety of different natural cannabinoids within cannabis, and some of them have much more importance or influence when it comes to product development. THC, as we noted, was the critical component for Health Canada's regulations, and that's where the regulatory cutoffs are being put into place. But cannabidiol, or CBD, and cannabinol, CBN, are very interesting from a product development perspective. These other cannabinoids are also starting to get some profile within product development. Now, here's another key feature. When you are pulling the raw extract from cannabis flower or cannabis shake or cannabis material, it is in a carboxylated form, and this is a carboxylic acid group on the THCA molecule, and under a heating process it goes through what's called decarboxylation, and you lose that carboxylic acid group, and this is the bioactive form of THC. THCA does not have the same bioactive component. THC does. So cannabinoids are perhaps the component within cannabis edibles that are going to be delivering a lot of the bioactive component, whether that's psychoactive or, as we just said, you can't make a health claim on a recreational cannabis product, but some of the purported health properties that you would be getting from a cannabis edible. Terpenes are a different story. This is where we're getting a lot of the flavor components. They're also, in general, very hydrophobic chemicals, but some of these terpenes also have potential bioactive or pharmaceutically active components, and this is where there's a lot of robust interest in understanding what's the potential when doing product development, because again, many of these terpenes have a very, very specific flavor profile. Linalool is very flowery. Carofylline is a peppery sort of clove pepper sort of flavor. Humulene, those of you who haven't taken my second year chemistry class know that I like to think about the Latin roots of many of the chemical names, but humulene would be coming from hops, Humulus lupulus. Pinene, you can guess from pine. Limonene from citrus fruit, lemons, and so on. Neroli is a very particular component used in perfumery. Geraniol is coming from geraniums, which actually surprisingly has a rosy sort of flavor. But all of these terpenes, many of the different cannabis breeders are breeding for different terpene profiles because it's going to give a different experience with that product. And when extracting out the rosin or oils from cannabis stock material, this is where you're going to be getting a variety of the different flavor components that are going to carry forward into the final product that you're working on. And so something to be very aware of. Different starting materials have different terpenes, different matrices have different amount of terpene carryover. Be aware of that and think about that from a product development perspective. Now, most of the components that we have been talking about have been hydrophobic molecules. And so THC, CBD, all of those terpenes for the most part have are reasonably hydrophobic. So they have low polarity, they have low charge potential, and they have low interaction with water. And this is an important thing to consider. If we think about the classical edibles products, we're thinking about chocolates, we're thinking about brownies or cookies. These have a very hydrophobic matrix. They're very dominant with a lot of lipid matrix within the product. And as such, we don't have a big challenge from a product development perspective for dispersion of the molecule within the product. The moment that we start to go into more water-based products, teas, beverages, de-alcoholized beers or wines, this is where you start to have a lot more challenge because you have to emulsify or encapsulate the hydrophobic molecule in a way that's going to prevent its agglomeration or creaming out, so to say, as if it within an emulsion. Think salad dressing. You've got that oily layer and it potential for it to separate out and cream out to the top of the product. You want to make sure that it remains dispersed within that product so that the consuming experience of it is uniform throughout and that you don't have product to product variation during canning and filling of that product. Now, I have a whole lecture that I've done previously on dispersions. So that could include colloids, it could nanoemulsions, emulsions, and so on. I pulled this slide from my talk, but what we really do need to think about is different types of emulsions, and in particular we're looking at oil and water emulsions where we're trying to create very small particulate so that those particles do not disperse back out into some sort of creaming layer. We do need to be very cognizant of this, and I have a whole lecture on dispersions on a different YouTube lecture, so you can watch that on your own time. So we do need, from a product design perspective, we need to be thinking very particularly about emulsification. There are a wide variety of different food grade emulsifiers that are available under Division 16 of Food and Drug Regulation. And again, any of these edibles products, while it wasn't explicitly listed in that table, make the assumption that your ingredients should be listed as Division 16 technical ingredients. You do need to be aware of partitioning, and because again, most plastics that are used for wrapping or coating product as part of the food safety and packaging, those plastics are hydrophobic. You see water bead up on plastic, and that hydrophobic nature of the plastic can allow for partitioning. The THC or CBD can migrate out of that product and into the plastic packaging. So you do need to be aware of that partitioning component and be very careful of that potential. Within many of those products, you do need to be aware of the dispersion, and even within different baked goods or so on, the dosing and making sure that that dosing is uniform within batch is very, very critical. You have to be extremely cognizant that the dosing has to be uniform, and so be careful about that. THC is very prone to oxidation, and so do you need to gas flush your packaging using a MAP packaging strategy? Do you need to be using different oxygen scavenging components, whether that's active packaging, to extend out the shelf life and ensure that the THC remains potent for the shelf life of the product? And of course, the sensory attributes. This has been something that a lot of questions have come up. How do you evaluate the sensory quality of a product? How can you go about evaluating the impact on this product? And I'm not going to give you all the answers in this lecture, but that's something that a lot of different organizations have thought about. Normally on a sensory analysis, you'd be putting out product and have people fill out a different survey tool. Liquored, just about right. Hedonistic, you could be scoring on perceived psychoactive effects. But how do you do it in a way that people are going to be safe? Normally, sensory analysis is done in a workplace type environment within the manufacturing space, and you just can't have people consuming THC containing products all over the place. So there have been discussions about, are you able to administer these products in people's homes and get sensory feedback through take-home survey tools? all sorts of different dialogue. I'm not going to solve that problem in this lecture, but we can continue our conversation about this further. Now, preventive control programs. Every cannabis edibles are not specifically subject to Safe Food for Canadians regulation, but Health Canada, as part of the licensing requirement for edibles manufacturers, is requiring a PCP program similar to SFCR. And so the liability and risk in this product class is extremely high. Health Canada does not want to be having recalls in this type of product. And as such, they want to see that there's a extremely well-managed preventive control strategy within the manufacturing of this product. So the challenge is that Health Canada is requiring cannabis reg-specific SOPs, and they're not necessarily designed with PCP programs in mind, but you can have some leverage to design the SOPs necessary for your PCP strategy. Most of the PCP programs that I've been working with different cannabis companies have been using RDHI, the Reference Database for Hazard Identification, as their baseline. But again, RDHI, for those of you who have taken our HACCP courses at Niagara College, RDHI is just the starting point for doing risk assessment. You do need to go and do a site-specific and a product-specific risk assessment. And some of the specific hazards that are not necessarily reflected in RDHI are things like dosing calibration. So in many cases, they'll talk about fortification or inclusion of nutrient and the nutritional impact. In this case, we do need to be extremely cognizant of the dosing calibration and make sure that any of the bioactive components are put in at the right component and calibrating equipment there appropriately. So we've been changing verbiage within the RDHI drop-downs to make sure that they're inclusive of the dosing type wording that's necessary. We do know that there have been pesticide, mycotoxin, and solvent carryover issues in inputs, and so making sure that you're going to suppliers that have similar type of preventive control programs for your raw inputs, and making sure that there's appropriate supplier verification and certificates of analysis on the variety of extractives or inputs that you may be purchasing from other licensed producers for the purposes of developing edibles products. Employee hygiene, again, so many of the cannabis edibles companies have come up through the, if I can use the term, garagista movement, the former black market, gray market for cannabis edibles. Many of these people are migrating over, and they're bringing some of their garage type experience over to the food manufacturing space. And we do need to be extremely precise on employee hygiene. Fortunately, many of the other workers that are in the cannabis space are coming from the pharmaceutical sector, and they do have exquisite hygiene, and therefore let's make sure that the cleanliness wins out in this case. We have heard about recalls occurring from metals contamination, and there are some recalls in the United States where the use of different shearing devices allowed for metals contamination in shake and flour products. In general, though, as product developers, we're using extracts, and you would think that the extracts would have some sort of filtration to remove metals contamination, but something to be aware of. Last but not least, supplier verification. Here in Canada, everything has to come from licensed producers, and so you do need to be absolutely strict on supplier verification that they are complying with the pesticide and other crop inputs that are allowed for cannabis for human use and such. You have to be absolutely on the ball when it comes to supplier verification. Again, I can't solve all the problems. This is a really high level dialogue, but feel free to ask me more questions about this, because there are specific things that you should be asking relative to that supplier verification. We have had suppliers become non-compliant in the Health Canada licensed producer and licensed processor system, and that aspect then rolls back to recalls. You have to be absolutely Loctite when it comes to be able to recall that product. Part of that comes down to the traceability and the amount of barcoding and labeling that goes onto these products. So, listing with the provincial cannabis stores. you have to wait for an open product call. It's not like the grocery retail sector where you can go in much more loosely. You have to wait very specifically for, it's almost like a tendering process by the provinces, where they will put out a call for the type and class of products that they're after, and they will put out very specific specifications that they're after. One that's very particular, they want a cost of goods threshold, so they want to say your product must fit within this cost band. They will have a budget category, so it could be value, better, good, best, THC dominant, and so on. They have all of these different categories that they have predefined, and as such, you may be wanting to make sure that that's going to fit in there. There are extremely specific GS1 barcoding requirements, and again, because of the traceability necessary on cannabis products, you have to have those GS1 barcodes. You can't just go and print stuff off of the internet. GS1 is the barcode management platform for international barcodes, and it is not just the barcode on the package that you see at the consumer level. You have to have case barcodes, you have to have master case barcodes, you have to have pallet barcodes. There are all sorts of barcoding requirements, and I will provide that labeling and barcoding document for you in Blackboard. You do have to watch out for the timing on those calls. You can't just go in unsolicited. Different provinces, different requirements. My background is mostly with helping companies with OCS. And the platform is not OCS.ca, it is doing business with OCS.ca. And there's lots and lots of really useful information in there to understand what's required on product development. Hopefully that was a useful high-level discussion on cannabis edibles products. Feel free to ask me more specific questions and we can go from there.